what level of detail you guys wanted, but I'll just share the one slide in that case.
Okay.
So this is kind of a one-slide summary of everything that's going on in our working group. So we've been defining sort of the overall multi-tenancy architecture framework, and there's several models there, and we're sort of encouraging all of those models. For short, we call them models A, B, C, and D. And the details are described in our docs. The current focus has been more from areas of compute, networking, and security. In future, we expect to have more work on multi-tenancy in the context of storage and monitoring and so on as well. So one of the threads of work that we have is multi-tenancy profiles and reference configurations for clusters in order to support multi-tenancy. So that's mostly reference documentation for now, and we may extend that to conformance tests in the future. This is basically saying these are the settings on a Kubernetes cluster that we would recommend for you in order to implement one of our multi-tenancy solutions. And those profiles would be something like what we've got here, right? There's a profile 1, which primarily relies on things like, current Kubernetes level 1.12 level functionality like pod security policies and CNI network policies. In profile 2, we hope to include recommendations of newer functionalities, including newer container runtimes like Containerd and Kata containers and things like that, as well as newer authorization and policy management functionalities like the stuff that your working group is working on, like OPA and Gatekeeper. So that's related to reference, security, and multi-tenancy configuration. So that's one piece of work. The other one is developing the control planes for these models further. And we are focusing primarily on models B and C. Model B, one way to look at it is basically the namespace grouping model. So really having a group of namespaces be under a tenant object or a hierarchical namespace object. In that, we did a version 1 of a tenant operator, and that proof of concept was demoed in KubeCon Barcelona. And then we have a version 2 based on KubeBuilder that is currently under development. We also have this proposal for hierarchical namespaces. Although I've grouped it under namespace grouping, it is kind of an independent piece of work that can be applied both here as well as independently. And so these are sort of pieces of work that can be used to build a model B like multi-tenancy model. Okay, model C is what we call virtual clusters model. This came from Alibaba. K3V from Rancher is also similar. This is still early days for that, but basically here, this is Kubernetes in Kubernetes. And again, we have more details on these slides. If you guys have time, we can go into any of these. But since you just want a 2-minute summary, I'm just going to focus on this for now. And then there's also sort of this talk of having a unified model where we combine models B and C, where we leverage the tenant CRD from model B and the virtual clusters from model C. There are also other threads of work. We continue to review and collect user requirements and continue to review with other working groups such as yourself. So this is kind of the very, very brief 2-minute summary of the different threads of work going on in our working group. Any questions? Did you want any more details, or was that adequate?
That was very helpful for me, at least. One quick question, and maybe this is covered in some of your detailed slides. So are these proposals core changes to at the API level in Kubernetes, or can all of these be overlaid on the current set of APIs? As you note here, operators and
yeah, so we are not making currently any core changes to Kubernetes. These are mostly CRDs and operators. Now, the hierarchical namespaces work, which we can talk more about, and Adrian is actually driving that. Although it doesn't currently directly change core Kubernetes, that has the potential of being a core feature. But the rest of it is mostly CRDs that can run on top of Kubernetes. Actually, Model D is actually a placeholder for if we really wanted to include tenancy as first-class citizenship in core Kubernetes. That is actually Model D. So we are not really developing that right now. So models B and C are basically two CRDs that can deal with some kind of namespace grouping or virtual clusters. And those are what we are primarily developing, and those are outside of core Kubernetes.
Great, thank you.
We are open to your suggestions and thoughts on how we can, promote this work further and how we can work with groups like yourself. And especially when it comes to the multi-tenancy profiles, where we have, both authorization recommendations as well as policy management recommendations for tenancy isolation. That's another area where maybe we can work with your group.
And this is Adrian speaking. I'm happy to talk about any of the hierarchical namespace details that you would be interested in, if that hasn't already answered what you're looking into.
It'd be great to add links to the documents that describe these things to the notes.
Yeah, so I have a list of references right here.
Great.
So this is our overall working group. This is the HNC work in progress tenant operator. And there's other documents in our GitHub. This is our Slack channel, and you're welcome, or mostly encouraged, very much encouraged to join our meetings at this link.
Okay, so can we help put some of the links on the meeting minutes?
Yeah, would you like me to copy it there, or are you going to?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have like slides 2 and 3 copied in. From my perspective, just in terms of like being able to read up afterwards.
I can just email you the. Do you want me to send you the slides, or put it somewhere public?
You can share the link of this slide.
Okay, I'll put this on Google, and I'll send you a publicly readable link.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful.
So I have a quick question, which I have a question which might be a long answer, and so it doesn't have to be answered here. If you can point to resources, or if other people are interested, which is, it sounds like these model B and C that you talked about were like sort of how the multi-tenancy is conceptualized and structured, like how do you describe the different tenants? And, and kind of what I'm curious about is like, but then independent of that, there's how do you actually separate them in a secure way? And I'm wondering, is that different per model, or is there yet another dimension, which is,
that is
how we use identities and keys and whatever to make things be multi-tenant on a single system.
That's right. So what you're referring to are the multi-tenancy profiles, which are reference configurations. So that's where you do things like, a suggested method of isolation involving, let's say, pod security policies and CNI network policies and so on, versus using, let's say, Kata containers or more isolated runtimes. So that part is the multi-tenancy profiles and references documentation, which currently we have some documentation. We're continuing to build on that, and we'll be doing some demos at KubeCon as well. And we've done some demos in the prior KubeCon as well. So that's as far as that. Now the model B and C are mostly related to tenancy control plane, which is really Kubernetes resources that enforce some kind of tenancy structure formally, right? Whether through tenant CRDs, whether through hierarchical namespaces, whether through virtual clusters. So that part is all sort of tenancy control plane. And then data plane isolation, that part is part of this multi-tenancy profiles and sample references. So we are not developing any new isolation techniques. We just want to qualify and recommend existing techniques, such as, let's say, network policies or Kata containers or things like that. So we are looking at both those, but those are two different dimensions. One is more of a control plane dimension. One is more of a data plane isolation dimension.
Thanks for pointing that out, because I didn't catch that difference. And like, I'm particularly just, interested in the data plane isolation, because I think that basically I've heard a lot of things and read things on and off about problems in all the existing things, but I don't have deep knowledge. So maybe some of those problems have been solved in the last year that I haven't been paying attention. Certainly, think it's technically solvable, but I had heard that it wasn't out of the box solvable with Kubernetes. So, but maybe there are common techniques on top of Kubernetes that have solved that. So I'm just really curious about where the group is, like what the group has come up with that is like, well, we believe these approaches are workable.
Yeah, in the data plane, our working group at the moment is not developing any new data plane isolation techniques. We are mostly in the process of curating existing techniques and perhaps providing reference models and maybe doing some testing. But in our working group, we are not actually developing, let's say, a new kind of container runtime for better isolation or whatever. That work is all happening. So part of the multi-tenancy working group's mission is to actually curate work that happens in other working groups as well, as long as it lines up with a consistent multi-tenancy architecture. So we are a clearinghouse and curation team as well as original content production team.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually a huge service because it's kind of hard to find all of these pieces, right? So do you currently have profile 1 and 2 documented further than is on the slide? Or?
It's sort of loosely documented, kind of like this, like here's the slide right here. You know, we're open to recommendations on how opinionated we need to get, because a lot of these things are somewhat subjective, and whether we need to have, more concrete. So we can feel free to contact us offline or contact me offline, because I particularly am interested in that. But it is sort of loose right now. Like, for example, this slide here shares profile 1 bare minimum to get started is, a secured by default Kubernetes configuration with RBAC, with pod admission controllers, with CIS Kubernetes. I haven't documented it here. And then profile 2 is, bringing in more dynamic policy engine based authorization, whether it's OPA or whatever, and more advanced container runtimes. But we would love to, this is an area where we would love to get input and guidance or suggestions on how opinionated we should get, how granular should be our profile definition. So it's still early here and we need to do more here, but this is sort of what we're thinking of right now.
But yeah, I think this is a great start. I'd certainly be more interested in a little more depth, but like basically I can commit to reading this in the next, week or so and circling back with feedback, at least one-on-one. Because I don't have the bandwidth to take on another working group, but I'm personally kind of interested in this topic, so I'll read up.
So Sarah, please contact me. I'll help you. I'm actually driving some of this profile stuff myself, and also along with a couple of others. So feel free to contact me one-on-one, and we can figure out how you can chip in with whatever time you have to this work.
Super, thanks.
So yeah, Adrian can tell you a lot more about the details of hierarchical network namespaces. So
yeah. Okay, so
should we talk about that now, or do we need to move on?
Yeah, Adrian, can you share about the hierarchical namespace?
Sure. I don't have any slides to share or even nice graphics right now. But I believe on the GitHub page, there's a link to a sort of demo script. And if there's not, I'll add one shortly. Yeah, so the idea behind hierarchical namespaces is that when you look at things like the tenant operator, which was part of the Model B, or the Model B solution, it is focused on the language of tenancy. So it has things such as admins and tenants and namespace templates. And so these are fairly high level concepts. The hierarchical namespace controller is a step below that, and it's based really on a very simple concept of adding hierarchy to namespaces, which is basically, you can think of it as every namespace has an annotation that points to its parent. Now in reality, that's actually held in a CRD for a bunch of reasons. Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is a graph that Faye put together. So yeah, inside each namespace is a singleton object. Currently, I've just called it the higher CR because I don't as a bit of a placeholder name. And that points to the parent namespace. And so here it's shown, you can see every namespace in the cluster has a common root. That's actually not necessary. It's technically a forest and not a tree. And so you can have as many namespaces, whether or not they're organized into a hierarchy or not. And the impact that this has, other than simply setting up some fairly easy APIs to see what the structure is that certain objects get copied from parents to children. Or if you're used to a sort of C++ or Java object-oriented model, you can think of it as the objects become visible in the children, which we of course accomplish just by copying them. So the most important objects, of course, are RBAC, roles and role bindings. So if you have permissions on a certain type of resource in the root namespace, you will also have similar permissions in all of the descendant namespaces. We're looking at adding exceptions, but for now there are no exceptions. And so it's very easy. There's no concept of administrator exactly, but it's very easy for you to create different types of administrators yourself just by using the RBAC objects that you're used to. At the moment, we can also copy secrets and config maps. So for example, let's say that you had a team that has a bunch of secrets that all of your services use. And for security reasons, you want your services to run in different namespaces. You can share your secrets and config maps among all of them. And that will also be configurable, although at this early stage, they are not yet. And that's the basic idea. I'm looking at different types of sort of administrative exceptions. I'm looking at ways to, if you make a change in the root namespace, to sort of slowly roll it out across the hierarchy instead of having it happen instantaneously, which is what currently happens. And of course, right now it's just it's basically a proof of concept quality. But there are two people who are working on it, who have just sort of onboarded at Google and are going to be working on it with me to add all of the productization stuff that you might expect, like metrics and logging and monitoring and all of that. So that's it so far, and that's the basic idea. There is a design doc that's linked to from GitHub. Other than that, is there anything else I can help with? Yeah, this is the design doc, thanks.
Yeah, I think I noticed in the text earlier below the figure. So one of the one of the intersect point for policy and multi-tenancy, when Yi-Sui first proposed the tenant CRD idea, is kind of like when you create all those namespace groups, you need a way to sort of automatically you can automatically spawn them, but with a clear clear limit enforced upon those namespaces. So basically, this is about the policy for quota. So I think this is one of the areas that Yi-Sui mentioned in the early days, that the tenant CRD, the whole tenant CRD design need policy, is that we need a way to define a policy that specifies for a given tenant, how much of the resource you are granted, and how each of the subnames and subname spaces you want to give for each one, how much resources, so that like everyone knows when and where to hit a wall, and so that we have a nice isolation for tenants. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually creating a hierarchical resource quota is not in the scope of what I'm working on now. However, what I'm doing certainly allows that. There's a couple of ways that we could get to that. So just to make one kind of point of comparison between the tenant CR and the hierarchical namespace, is that a tenant is basically, if you think of Kubernetes today, you kind of have a two-stage hierarchy. You've got clusters, and underneath that, you've got namespaces.
Yeah.
the tenancy are introduced a third level in that. So inside a cluster, you have multiple tenants, and each of those tenants can have a flat list of namespaces. So one way to look at the HNC proposal is that it's a generalization of that. You can have a tree of, let's say, arbitrary depth. I think in any practical case, you want to limit the depth, but you can have a tree of unlimited depth. So you could have teams and sub-teams and sub-sub-teams and services in those, or if you prefer tenants and subtenants and sub-subtenants. Multi-team tenancy, I think, is going to be a major application of multi-tenancy. So any kind of thing like a tenant-based resource quota, which is not something that currently exists, you could very easily generalize that to the hierarchical namespace model as well, and in exactly the same way, which is most likely a webhook that has some kind of awareness of things beyond simply a single namespace. It's very easy to apply that to a tree. So in the design doc, I do talk about how in addition to the CRs, which will sprinkle through all of the namespaces, which could be quite difficult to work with, I also plan to add labels that will indicate some of the hierarchy as well. So you can easily select all namespaces that are in a certain subtree, for example. And so if we were to, say, extend resource quota to operate across namespaces, but based on labels, that would be one way that you could very easily get a hierarchical resource quota. The other alternative, of course, is that somebody just writes an add-on, like just a regular validating admission webhook, which is simply aware of the hierarchy. Does that answer that question?
Also, I can add a little bit to that, but yeah, if you have any thoughts on Adrian's summary, go ahead, and I'll just add a few more comments after that.
No, that sounds great. Yeah.
So what I additionally wanted to add was that the resource quota management aspect of multi-tenancy, at the moment, we are holding back on that while we firm up whether the tenancy architecture will fundamentally assume the existence of hierarchical namespaces or not, because we could choose to do it with or without hierarchical namespaces, and hierarchical namespace has a value by itself, also independent of multi-tenancy. And so, yes, we will be coming soon. So the point you referred to about Yesui referring to resource quota back when we were doing the V1 tenant controller, at that time, I think maybe I'm guessing that Yesui talked to you at a relatively early stage of our development. But the thought at that point later, as we developed the tenant controller V1, which largely applies to tenant controller V2 as well, is that if we had a resource sitting above the namespace resource, whether we call it the tenant CRD or whatever, that would have a resource quota, and you need not specify resource quotas for the individual child namespaces. And it would essentially be that resource quota is only implemented and enforced for the aggregation of those namespaces. So we would write, or somebody would write, an admission controller which would essentially track the resource usage across a group of namespaces. And then in addition, the resource quota of each individual namespaces, if explicitly specified, would be enforced just like it is today. Meaning that you can choose to have a resource quota on the individual sub namespace within a tenant, and that will be enforced by Kubernetes core as it is today. But then an additional admission controller would aggregately enforce resource quota across the aggregation of namespaces. However, that needed to be further analyzed because we have to actually figure out how does things like C group quotas and all that actually work, because those are actually, some of those quotas are actually enforced in runtime. They're not control plane quotas, right? They're actually runtime quotas on CPU allocation and so on. So do those even make sense at a namespace aggregation level? So bottom line is that we have taken a pause on that for now. We will be coming back to the topic very shortly. And if there's a way that you think we can engage with you, we'd be happy to collaborate with you on that. So basically what UC may have mentioned to you, that kind of, we have to revisit that in the context of our most recent work. So anyway, I just wanted to add that on top of Adrian's comment. One good thing about the HNC approach in particular is that namespace quotas can apply to parents and child namespaces, and you can largely reuse existing quota management mechanisms with maybe some assumptions. So stay tuned as we figure out more of our resource quota strategy. It's still a work in progress for the new models. Sorry, I didn't mean to be long-winded, but that's, I just wanted to draw the connection between what you may have discussed with USUE several months ago versus where things are right now.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. And maybe all very premature and too early, but if I wanted to see kind of what would the impact be for defining either tenant-aware or hierarchical namespace or both aware network policies or pod security policies, is there a repository of kind of use cases or examples, or are we just, it's too early yet?
It's a little early. So I'm not an expert in network policies. I have looked into pod security policies. Pod security policies would, I believe, operate in a very simple way, which is simply if you put the PSP in a ancestor namespace, it'll simply be copied to all of its children, and so it can be enforced in that way. Network policy is a little bit more subtle in that you can select, I believe, namespaces based on labels for source and destinations in the that are identified by the policy. Is that correct?
Correct. I think there's some nuance to different CNI plugins, how they implement that, but yeah, I
Right.
think at a high level, that's correct.
Yeah, and so based on that, I did add a section into the design doc about how we are going to be putting in, basically on every namespace for every one of its ancestors, there will be a label, which basically identifies the subtree that it is in. And so you could simply select those labels to, for example, allow communication within a subtree but not outside of it, or communication from one subtree to another, things like that. That is the best that I have thought of so far. I have not actually gone through the trouble of, well, let's say either implementing it yet, although that's on my list, let alone testing it in any kind of realistic scenario. I wouldn't even know how to do that. But
I'll add a little bit more. So we actually did that for the tenant controller V1, and we will probably do that.
Cool.
So we, I actually did the tenant controller V1 with pod security policies and network policies in our sample tenant controller profile 1 based implementation, which we had demoed at KubeCon. But we didn't sort of, since that was more of a KubeCon demo, we haven't documented that as an official reference just yet.
What did the network policy allow? Did it allow for communication within a tenant?
Yes. So network policy was, yeah. So basically the policy was, so let me just kind of summarize here. So the reference we used for our demo was that when you're using multi-tenancy, pod security policies would only would only allow strictly non-privileged operations only, right? So all of the pod security policies were set up for, so that was our recommendation, right? Our initial recommendation for multi-tenancy was you should set up your pod security policies, and then the instrumentation would be through the namespace templating and all that stuff, as well as the initial cluster setup. But we would set up the pod security policies to ensure absolutely restricted containers, non-privileged, no host privileges, all of that stuff, no root. And the network policy would be set up to only allow communication within the namespaces corresponding to a tenant and never across tenants. That was it. we did not publish that as an official recommendation because it was a demo for KubeCon, and we are open to deciding how officially we want to publish that going forward, or would that be up to the implementer, but with some guidance from our working group. So if you have any thoughts on that, again, feel free to contact us and we can collaborate in however mechanism is helpful to you.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to see the thoughts about the demo, what was demoed, and if possible, and would love to give feedback.
Yeah, if you go back to the videos of KubeCon Barcelona as well as KubeSec, the Aqua conference, we demoed it there, and these are the kinds of port security policies and network policies we used.
Great, will do.
So let me ask a question for you guys while we are here. Would you see the policy working group as sort of a horizontal across? Do you come up with recommendations, or do you come up with maybe implementations in areas? How would you want to? How do you typically contribute to other working groups or SIGs or your own? And do you have any thoughts on how you guys can collaborate with us on our multi-tenancy related threads?
Yeah, mostly we provide recommendations. So as any other working groups in Kubernetes, we are cross SIG, right? So for example, we in talking with SIGAuth regarding the PSP, some of the PSP work, and maybe some other SIGs for policy regarding other aspects. So for multi-tenancy, I think for the policy working group, probably folks here are interested in how we could apply policy to help the multi-tenancy lifecycle management, that aspect. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll volunteer like a concrete example. I mean, it'd be something I'd be interested in, is like producing a set of either test cases or a test harness or something along the lines of these different profile recommendations and how those are, what's the impact across the various policies that have to be defined, and then how could you validate that you met that profile?
Yeah. So that exactly. So that work related to the cluster profile recommendations for multi-tenancy and possibly sample PSPs and sample NSPs and things like that. Yeah, we can. Please contact me, because that's actually an area which I want to document in the coming weeks. Let's say the next 2 months before KubeCon. So please reach out to any of us, and you can reach out to me. I'm actually driving some of that directly as well. So that's one thing. The second thing that I would welcome your working group's input is what you guys are seeing going on with OPA and other such dynamic policy engines, and how you see that could be potentially applied to tenancy policy.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I can give you a quick answer there. I literally just came from a meeting at Stira. So, I definitely know that the OPA project is aware of and or interested. I'm not entirely clear as to so I guess OPA as dynamic policy can implement some form of multi-tenant policy, right? To your point, or the earlier discussion around network policy can be constructed with labels. Pod security policy kind of intersects with admission controller policy. So some of this can be done with OPA. I'm not, and I know that users of OPA definitely are asking about multi-tenancy features. I don't know how detailed that mapping has been completed. In other words, where where's OPA need to change to adapt to multi-tenancy features, or where is it overlapping completely? And maybe the redundancies. That is something I could certainly ask and try to get to an answer.
Yeah, please do. I mean, we
That was
welcome.
actually my question as well, is that it would seem to be that it may be true that it would just be a application of OPA rather than a change to OPA. But I think that those, there might be, maybe there is something that is changing in Kubernetes to support, like maybe one of these models would then imply a feature that a policy language or more the policy or the management API or something would need to adapt to. And that might be something to consider as this gets more concrete, like things that integrate with Kubernetes. Does it create new requirements for those things?
Yeah, the Gatekeeper project was earlier actually trying to figure out how a tenancy model for Gatekeeper fit in with Kubernetes. I think they kind of put too much thought on that on hold since Kubernetes didn't have very much, but they would probably be interested in, as they're designing the Gatekeeper project, of integrating possibly with one of the tenant models if you want to reach out to them.
Right, but are they? You guys work. I mean, you guys make. Do you work closely with the Gatekeeper and OPA teams?
I used to work. I worked quite closely with Max Smythe over the summer. I had 2 interns working on Gatekeeper. Sadly, we didn't finish the project that I was hoping to get done, which was mutations inside of Gatekeeper. But no, I know that project quite well, and I can. Is Max a good contact for all of that stuff? Robert, Erica?
The funny thing is, I haven't been as involved with Gatekeeper as with core OPA.
Oh, okay.
So the folks I usually go to for all things Gatekeeper would be Torin or Tim. But Max definitely was on one of the few meetings that I was on. Max was there.
Yeah, and I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Rita is a great contact
For Microsoft.
For
Redesign?
yeah, for the Gatekeeper. Yeah.
We did talk with each of them during the last KubeCon, and so far all we said was we need to work together.
Well, I think that just into the wider SIG, there's OPA has been very involved in what we're doing. Like we've been having different people come in and out and participate, and so we have a very good relationship with them. And if there was something that we needed to engage on, they've generally been friendly when we ask them for input and questions, and we try not to tax them, but we also, I think they appreciate us spreading the word about OPA when appropriate and want to make sure that we have good information about that.
One quick question while we're on this topic. Do you see pod security policies getting deprecated in favor of OPA-like approaches, or do you see those? I've heard some rumors about some people wanting to deprecate PSPs. Is that
the pod security policy problem is they can't go away, but they're not easy to move forward either. So I think people are hoping that things like OPA through Gatekeeper and these other mechanisms can be used to steer people who have greater needs that pod security policies can't necessarily do right now well, without having to rework huge amounts of Kubernetes to accomplish bringing them to GA, or have some kind of way out of the problem.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that both will exist, and neither is getting deprecated. Certainly not OPA, but probably also not PSPs.
Yeah. See.
Yeah, they're just.
Go. Yeah.
So
Yeah, we're just now looking at.
Yeah, sorry, let me finish that thought.
Looking at creating PSP replacements in Gatekeeper. That was something that I contributed a little bit to at the beginning of the summer. I think Rita has taken that work over, but it's far too early to say that it will be suitable replacement, but they are looking at it.
Right. So yeah, we have to kind of look at all of these dependencies as moving targets, and as we develop reference profiles, we just have to kind of keep staying on touch with what's happening in all those different teams.
Yeah, I don't think until someone expresses interest in like moving things forward, I don't think pod security policies are like too much in likely to be changed anytime soon.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Adrian. I actually have to head off. So anything else for me, just feel free to shoot me an email or send me.
Thank you so much for dropping by.
Okay, thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, moving on the agenda. So do we have any like update for the Guardian, or there's a new one?
Okay, I guess I'll drop as well. This is Sanjeev. So, but please let's connect on the cluster reference points. So please reach out to me, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. You can also find us on the Slack channel.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so like any other items?
I just wanted to bring up that dynamic backend audit policy design. I need. Oh, is that the wrong link? Darn it. Yes, that is not quite the link I wanted. Let me add the one I meant. Sorry. There we go. He was asking for a review by the end of this week. And I definitely think you should look over it.
Yeah.
So, sorry, this is coming out of which working group?
This is coming out of, I think, SIGAUTH.
Yeah.
Oh, SIGAUTH. Actually, I just had a nuts and bolts question. I was trying to get onto the SIGAUTH call for the last couple of weeks. Is there, I couldn't find like an actual meeting link or dial-in number or something. And maybe I just wasn't looking in the right place. Are they having calls?
I think so. They didn't have one a couple weeks ago because there's only on the agenda, and I don't know if today there was one.
Yeah, their meeting time should be like right before us or sometime earlier.
Okay, well, I'll keep trying and maybe reach out on Slack, but I think their agenda notes document, Google document, wasn't public, so I requested access. I don't think I had access. Anyway, I'll give it another try. Thanks.
No problem. Okay, like any other items?
The update we're supposed to give, what was at the next, what's it called, community meeting?
The TSC meeting?
No, the community. Yeah. So, do you want to do that or?
I will not be available, so that's why I wanted to bring that up.
I think I can do it. Well, I will be in Amsterdam next week, but the time seems okay for me.
Okay.
Yeah, September 26th, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. So then there's the slide template.
There's a slide template?
Yeah,
Oh,
he linked
Christ.
to it. Don't worry, it's only 10 slides.
My plan was just yeah. My plan was
We can
just
ask
scrolling down
if
the.
we can move it to a different time if you want. Like, be like, we weren't ready for that.
Okay. Do you have the link for the template?
Yeah, here.
Okay. So many slides. This is. Okay. I will try to come up with something.
So also we didn't really, I couldn't make it, and JJ hadn't been very involved in the SIG for a few months. So JJ made up some stuff for the last TOC meeting, but they're asking us for updates, one slide once a month. And so he came up with some stuff that, probably didn't actually include all the work of the SIG. But I'd love to it's supposed to be the first Tuesday of every month. So like, I'd love to kind of get your feedback on like some small amount of screen real estate, like that you would like, what kind of highlights you would like to communicate to the CNCF monthly.
Okay.
And so I'll offline probably, on Slack,
Okay.
I just want to give you a heads up that we didn't have our act together really a few weeks ago, but JJ gave some kind of an update. And then we want to get into kind of a regular pattern of just having some template that we fill in. So.
Okay, that sounds cool.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. I had a meeting with JJ actually like two weeks ago.
Yay.
Yeah. Almost recruit me, so that was
almost recruit you for a startup.
Yeah, for Tetra.
So we thanks for doing that PR on the policy team info. I hope my feedback wasn't overwhelming. I told JJ he should give feedback too, so that it all can be folded into one. And it was mostly just structural, like so that it, we're trying to get consistency across the repo and stuff. But I want to surface the work that you're doing, and we can also I don't know if you're using the same Zoom as like if on the sig-security Zooms are automatically uploaded to YouTube and stuff. So we can coordinate it offline, but I just wanted to realize that.
Yeah,
that's another thing that we could do.
Yeah, I'm using my own Zoom account, so it would be nice. And I've been traveling, so I'll be slowly updating on the PR.
That's cool. Yeah, and Erica, I don't know if I'd like you to chime in as too, because you're mentioned as co-lead, so I want to make sure that you're at least plus oneing it when it's ready and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you should first like add yourself to the sig-security like member of the repo, I think, and then we can add you for issues. And I tried to add you before, but I think you are not part of the either.
Oh,
yeah, organization or.
So yeah, we have a little process where it's like it's a little weird artifact of where we're at right now, but basically we're using the GitHub settings as a way to catalog who's in which roles. And so if people step into some kind of a role that's written down, then we add people to have GitHub access, and then we just write down like, everybody, like there's a process for merging PRs, right? Which require a certain amount of approval and stuff, but everybody can then be added to issues and comments because GitHub kind of requires write access to just add people to issues and stuff like that. But I can like as soon as we get like a README for the policy subgroup, and then we can like kind of like officially have you be leads of the project, and we're kind of like putting this process, retrofitting the process from. We've all been working on this stuff before we were a CNCF SIG, so some of that is just like kind of getting stuff documented as it is, right? And also raising visibility for this group because it's doing great work. And like we want, I want the the main page of the repo to highlight the work that everybody's doing here. So you have help, and people can chime in and join you.
Awesome, thank you. I will then review and make sure that PR. I think I have it somewhere linked to, and follow up on the next steps if needed.
Yeah, another thing I talked with JJ is so for the KubeCon San Diego, the sig-security deep dive session, whether we can like do it like we did for the Europe Summit this year, that like the policy team or like Justin Capos, we can share something via the deep dive session.
What day is the deep dive session?
I haven't checked that out.
Dan was supposed to follow up on I'm not. Dan's doing all of the like.
Okay.
Scheduling of that. So I hope it's on the schedule. If not, Dan will let us know. But they reserve time for each of the SIGs. But I don't know that we've actually coordinated the exact time that we're in. So we should do that soonish. Yeah. It's good because everybody has their, like, if people are speaking, then they know where they're speaking, so we can save conflicts. But I think it worked out really well to have, when you did it last time, Howard, with Justin Capos, to have somebody from the policy side and somebody from who's been more involved in the security review side of things, right? Because then it has a balanced perspective of the SIG. And, I think that, and Brendan did that, and I don't know if you did it with Brendan in China, where that was kind of like, oops, forgot about China. We sort of got it together pretty quickly, and just he, I think, redid the one. But I think that, like, we want to try to get into a pattern of, having these these slides that we just update each time, and and do more advanced planning. But it would be great to have somebody from policy side. And I don't know if there's somebody else who would also like to speak, but.
Okay, I will email Jen and CC you guys. So at least get the time slot.
Get the conversation going. That'd be great.
Yeah, I need to book my hotel and flight for that as well.
Yeah, I booked the hotel, but not the flight yet. The hotel, like I've like trained now. Hotels first.
Yeah.
Okay. Great meeting. So shall we conclude for today?
Just on time.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. This was fun.
Thanks.
Okay. I will upload the recording as usual. Bye-bye.
Bye.